Well, hey everybody, it's me, Eric, again. I'm here to read you another story. Tonight's story is the last of the McBroom series, McBroom, the Rainmaker. Copyright 1973. It was a Thistle book by Grosset and Dunlap, written by Sid Fleischman and illustrated by Kurt Wirth. I dislike to tell you this, but some folks have no regard for the truth. A stranger claims he was riding a mule past our wonderful 1-acre farm and was attacked by woodpeckers. Well, there's no truth to that. No, indeed. Those weren't woodpeckers. They were common prairie mosquitoes. Small ones. Why, skeeters grow so large out here that everybody uses chicken wire for mosquito netting. But I'm not going to say an unkind word about those zigzagging, hot-tempered, needle-nosed creatures. They rescued our farm from ruin. That was during the big drought we had last year. Dry, merciful powers. Our young'uns found some pollywogs and had to teach them to swim. It hadn't rained in so long those tadpoles had never seen water. That's the sworn truth, certain as my name's Josh McBroom. Why, I'd as soon grab a skunk by the tail as tell a falsehood. Now I'd best creep up on the big drought the way it crept up on us. I remember we did our spring plowing, as usual, and the skeeters hatched out as usual. The blood-sucking rapscallions could be mighty pesky, but we learned to distract them. The thirsty critters could drink up anything red. Will, Jill, Hester, Chester, Peter, Polly, Tim, Tom, Mary, Larry, and little Clorinda, I called out. I hear the whine of gallinipers. Better put in a patch of beets. Once the beets were up, the skeeters stuck in their long beaks like straws. Didn't they feast, though? They drained out the red juice. The beets turned white, and we harvested them as turnips. The first sign of a dry spell coming was when our clocks began running slow. We grew our own clocks on the farm. Vegetable clocks. Now, I'll admit that may be hard to believe, but not if you understand the remarkable nature of our topsoil. Rich, glory be. Anything would grow in it, lickety-bang. 3 or 4 crops a day until the confounded big dry came along. Of course, we didn't grow clocks with gears and springs and a name on the dial. Came close once, though. I dropped my dollar pocket watch one day, and before I could find it, the thing had put down roots and grown into a $3 alarm clock. But it never kept accurate time after that. It was our young'uns who discovered they could tell time by vegetable. They planted a cucumber seed, and once the vine leapt out of the ground, it traveled along steady as a clock. An inch a second, Will said, kind of like a second hand. Blossoms come out on the minute, Jill said, kind of like a minute hand. They tried other vegetable timepieces, but pole beans had a way of running a mite fast and squash a mite slow. As I say, those homegrown clocks began running down. I remember my dear wife Melissa was boiling 3.5-minute eggs for breakfast. Little Clorinda planted a cucumber seed, and before it grew 3 blossoms and 30 inches, those eggs were hard-boiled. Mercy, I declared. Topsoil must be drying out. But I wasn't worried. Rain would turn up. What turned up was our neighbor, Heck Jones. Rusty nails stuck out of his bulging pockets. He was a tall, scrawny man with eyes shifty as minnows. Hee-haw, he laughed. Drought's a-comin'. You won't be able to grow weeds. Better buy some of my rain nails. Rain nails? I said. Magnetized 'em myself, he grinned. Secret formula, neighbor. Pound 'em in the ground and they'll draw rain clouds like flies to a garbage heap. Fiddle-faddle, I declared. Flap-doodle, sir. Why, only $5 apiece. I'm merely trying to be a service neighbor. Other farmers will buy my rain nails, hee-haw. And off he went, cackling through his nose. Wasn't he an infernal scoundrel, I thought, setting out to swindle his neighbors into buying rusty old nails at $5 each? Well, the days turned drier and drier. No doubt about it. Our wonderful topsoil was losing some of its get-up-and-go. Why, it took almost a whole day to raise a crop of corn. The young'uns had planted a plum tree, but all it would grow was prunes. Dogs would fight over a dry bone for the moisture in it. "Will, Jill, Hester, Chester, Peter, Polly, Tim, Tom, Mary, Larry, and little Clorinda," I called. "Keep your eyes peeled for rain." They took turns in the treehouse scanning the skies, and one night Chester said, "Pa, what if it doesn't rain by 4th of July? How'll we shoot off firecrackers?" "Be patient, my lambs," I said. "We used to grow our own firecrackers, too. Don't let me forget to tell you about it. But why, it's a long spell, the 4th of July." My, wasn't the next morning a scorcher. The sun came out so hot that our hens laid fried eggs. But no, that wasn't the big dry. The young'uns planted watermelons to cool off and beets to keep the mosquitoes away. "Look," Polly exclaimed, pointing to the watermelons. "Pa, they're rising off the ground." Rising? They began to float in the air like balloons. We could hardly believe our eyes. And gracious me, when we cut those melons open, it turned out they were full of hot air. "Hee-haw," Heck Jones laughed. There he stood, jingling the rusty nails in his pocket. "Better buy some rain nails, only $10 apiece." I shot him a scowl. "You double the price, sir." "True, neighbor, and the weather's double as dry." "Big drought's a-comin'. It's almost here. How many $10 rain nails do you want?" "Flim-flam," I answered stoutly. "None, sir." And off he went, cackling through his nose. Drought wasn't a worry to him. Heck Jones was such a shiftless farmer that he could carry a whole year's harvest in a tin cup. Now he was making himself rich peddling flim-flam, flapdoodle, fiddle-fame, rain collectors. Farmers all over the country were hammering those useless, rusty old nails into the ground. They were getting desperate. Well, I was getting a mite worried myself. Our beets were growing smaller and smaller, and the skeeters were growing larger and larger. Many a time, before dawn, a rapping at the windows would wake us out of a sound sleep. It was those confounded needle-nosed galliponicers pecking away, demanding our breakfast. Then it came, the big dry. Mercy, our cow began giving powdered milk, but all it brought up was steam. Mercy, our cow began giving powdered milk. We pumped away on our water pump, but all it brought up was steam. The oldest boys went fishing and caught 6 dried catfish. "Not a rain cloud in sight, Pa," Mary called from the tree house. "Watch out for gallinippers," Larry shouted as a mosquito made a dive at him. The earth was so parched we couldn't raise a crop of beets, and the varmints were getting downright ornery. Then, as I stood there, I felt my shoes getting tighter and tighter. I looked down. They must have shrunk 2 sizes. "Thunder Nation," I exclaimed. "Our topsoil's so dry it's gone reverse. It's shrinking things." Didn't I stay awake most of the night, our wonderful 1-acre farm might shrink to a square foot. And all night long the skeeters rattled the windows and hammered at the door. Big? The smallest ones must have weighed 3 pounds. In the moonlight, I saw them chase a yellow-billed cuckoo. Didn't that make me sit up in a hurry? An idea struck me. Glory be, I'd break that drought. First thing in the morning, I took Will and Chester to town with me and rented 3 wagons and a birdcage. We drove straight home, and I called everyone together. "Shovels, my lambs. Heap these wagons full of topsoil." The mosquitoes were rising in swarms, growing more temperish by the hour. I heard a cackling sound, and there stood Heck Jones. "Hee-haw, neighbor." Hee-haw, neighbor. Clearing out? Giving up? Why, I've got 3 rain nails left. Last chance. Sir, I said, your rusty old nails are a bamboozle and a hornswoggle. I intend to do a bit of rainmaking and break this drought. Hee-haw, he laughed and ambled off. We got a chipmunk visitor. Before long, we were ready to go. It might be a longish trip, and we had loaded up with picnic campers, rolls of chicken wire, and our raincoats. Where are we going, Pa? Jill called from one of the wagons. Hunting, my lambs. We're going to track down a rain cloud and wet this topsoil. But how, Pa? Asked Tim. I lifted the birdcage from under the wagon seat. Presto, I said, and whipped off the cover. Look at that lost-looking, scared-looking, long-tailed creature. Found it hiding from the skeeters under a milk pail this morning. It's a genuine rain cow, my lambs. A rain crow? Mary said, it doesn't look like a crow at all. Correct and exactly, I said, smiling. It looks like a yellow-billed cuckoo, and that's what it is. But don't folks call them rain crows? Why, that bird can smell a downpour coming 60 miles away. Rattles its throat and begins to squawk. All we got to do is follow that squawk. But you never heard such a quiet bird. We traveled miles and miles across the prairie, this way and the other, and not a rattle out of that rain crow. The big dry had done its mischief everywhere. We didn't see a dog without his tongue dragging, and it took 2 of them to bark at us once. A farmer told us he hadn't been able to grow anything all year but baked potatoes. We came to a field of sorghum cane, and our wagon wheels almost got stuck fast. I thought at first we had run over chewing gum, but no, that sweet cane had melted down to molasses and was dripping across the road. Day after day, we hauled our 3 loads of topsoil across the prairie, but that rain crow didn't so much as clear its throat. The young'uns were getting impatient. Speak up, rain crow, Chester muttered desperately. Rattle, Hester pleaded. Squawk, said Peter. Please, said Mary, just a little peep would help. Not a cloud appeared in the sky. I'll confess I was getting a mite discouraged, and the 4th of July not another 2 weeks off. We curled up under chicken wire that night as usual, and the big skeeters kept banging into it so you could hardly sleep. Rattled like a hailstorm, and suddenly at daybreak I rose up laughing. Hear that? The young'uns crowded around the rain crow. We hadn't been able to hear its voice rattle for the mosquitoes. Now it turned in its cage, gazed off to the northwest, opened its yellow beak, and let out a real ear-busting rain cry. Quack, quack, quack. Put on your raincoats, my lambs, I said, and we rushed to the wagons. Quack, quack, quack. Didn't we raise dust? That bird faced northeast, like a dog on point. There was a rain cloud out there, and before long Jill gave a shout. I see it! And the others chimed in, one after another. Me too! Caw-caw, caw-caw, caw-caw. We headed directly for that lone cloud, the young'uns yelling, the horse snorting, and the bird squawking. Glory be, the first raindrop spattered as large as quarters, and my, didn't the young'uns frolic in that cloudburst. They lifted their faces and opened their mouths and drank right out of the sky. They splashed about and felt mud between their toes for the first time in ages. We all forgot to put on our raincoats and got wet as fish. Our dried up topsoil soaked up raindrops like a sponge. It was a joy to behold, but if we stayed longer, we'd get stuck in the mud. Back in the wagons, I shouted. Hold my lambs, and not a moment to lose. Second train today. Home was right where we left it, and so was Heck Jones. He was fixing to give his house a fresh coat of paint. I reckoned with the money he'd got selling rusty nails. He'd even bought himself a skeeter-proof suit of armor and was clanking around in it. He lifted the steel visor. "Howdy, neighbor. Come back to put your farm up for sale. I'll make you a generous offer, a nickel an acre." "Preposterous, sir," I answered, my temper rising. "My farmers all over the country are ready to sell out of this drought doesn't break in 24 hours. 5 cents an acre, that's my top price, neighbor. Our farm is not for sale," I declared, "and the drought is about over. I'm going to make it rain." "Hee-haw," he cackled. "The big drought's only half of it. You don't see any skeeters, do you? But they'll be back, and you'll wish you had a suit of armor, same as me. They chased the blacksmith out of his shop. Yep, and they're busy sharpening their noses on his grindstone. Sell, neighbor, and run for your lives." "Never, sir," I answered. But I did rush my dear wife Melissa and the young'uns into the house. Then I got a pinch of onion seeds and went from wagon to wagon, sowing a few seeds in each load of moist earth. I didn't want to crowd those onions. Now that rich topsoil of ours had been idle a long time. It was raring to go, but before I could run back to the house, the greens were up. By the time I could get down on the shotgun, the tops had grown 4 or 5 feet tall. Onions are terrible slow growers. Before I could load my shotgun, the bulbs were finally busting up through the soil. We stood at the windows watching. Those onion roots were having a great feast. The wagons heaved and creaked as the onions swelled and lifted themselves. They were already the size of pumpkins, but that wasn't near big enough. Soon they were larger than wash tubs and began to shoulder the small ones off the wagons. Suddenly, we hear a distant roaring in the air. Those zing-zang, hot-tempered, blood-sucking prairie mosquitoes were returning from town with their stingers freshly sharpened. The big dry hadn't done their dispositions any good. Their tempers were at a boil. "You're going to shoot them down, Pa?" Will asked. "Too many for that," I answered. "How big do those onions have to grow?" Chester asked. "How big are they now?" "A little smaller than a cowshed." "That's big enough," I nodded, lifting the window just enough to poke the shotgun through. Well, the gallinippers spied the onions I'd planted, blood-red onions, you know, and came swarming over our farm. I let go at the bulbs with a double charge of buckshot and slammed the window. "Handkerchiefs, everyone!" I called out. The odor of fresh-cut onions shot through the air, under the door and through the cracks. Cry, in no time our handkerchiefs were wet with discharge. Well, you never saw such a surprised gallinippers. They zing-zanged every which way, most of them backwards, and wheep, their eyes began to flow like sprinkling cans. Onion tears. The roof began to leak. Mud puddles formed everywhere. Before long, the downpour was equal to any cloudburst I ever saw. The skeeters kept their distance after that, but they'd been mighty helpful. With our farm freshly watered, we grew tons of great onions, 3 or 4 crops a day, gave them away to farmers all over the county. We broke the big drought, and that's how I came to be known as McBroom the Rainmaker. We didn't hear a he or a haw out of Heck Jones. Inside his clanking suit of armor, he grumbled and growled and finished painting his house, and that was a mistake, for the gallinippers hadn't left the county. They had just flocked off somewhere for a breath of fresh air. Well, they flocked back. I was standing with my shoes in the earth. My feet had been a torment ever since our dry topsoil had shrunk the leather. "Little Clorinda," I said, "kindly plant a vegetable clock. I reckon it'll take 1 minute exactly to grow these shoes 2 sizes larger." She planted a cucumber seed, and that's when the gallinippers returned. Flocks and flocks of them. And my, didn't they look hungry. You could see their ribs standing out. They headed for Heck Jones' house as if he'd rung the dinner bell. That ornery, wily neighbor of ours had painted his house a fool-headed red. Well, the huge skeeters dropped like hawks. They speared the wood siding with their long, grindstone-sharpened stingers. Must have gone clear through, for we could see Heck Jones in the windows, hammering over the tips. Oh, he was chuckling and cackling. The gallinippers flapped their wings like caught roosters, thousands of them. The next thing I knew, all those flapping wings lifted the house a few inches, then a foot. I was surprised to see the floor remain behind. I reckoned Heck Jones had pulled the nails to sell when those prairie mosquitoes gave a mighty heave and flew off with the house. Little Corinna and I were so dumbfounded we'd forgot about the cucumber clock. It had grown 37 blossoms. I tripped over my own feet, and no wonder. My shoes had grown even more than a yard long. Cacock, cacock, cacock! Glory be! Rain, and it wasn't long in coming. I almost felt sorry for Heck Jones the next day. He could be seen walking his floor without a roof over his head in the downpour. The young'uns had a splendid 4th of July. Grew all the fireworks they wanted. They'd dash about with bean shooters, shooting radish seeds into the ground. You know how fast radishes come up. In our rich topsoil, they grew quicker than the eye. The seeds hardly touched the ground before they took root and swelled up and exploded. They'd go off like strings of firecrackers. And mercy, what a racket. At nightfall, a scared cat ran up a tree, and I went up a ladder to get it down. Reached in the branches and caught it by the tail. I'd be lying if I didn't admit the truth. It was a skunk. Wow. McBroom, The Rainmaker by Sid Fleischman. Illustrations by Kurt Worth. Copyright 1973. A Thistle Book by Grosset and Dunlap Incorporated, a National General Company, published in New York. Well, that's the last of the McBroom books that I've got laying around, and you can subscribe below. If you have any suggestions about books I can read, you just pop into the comments there, or I'm just going to keep reading. I hope you enjoyed it. Good night for now.